At 16 years old, Ethan Cole had already learned what it felt like to be forgotten. After aging out of a temporary shelter program, he found himself sleeping wherever he could. Bus stations, abandoned buildings, even beneath highway overpasses when the nights turned cold. No family, no savings, no place to call home. Most people who saw him looked away. Others barely noticed him at all. Then one day, while hiking through a remote mountain valley searching for somewhere to spend the winter, Ethan discovered an abandoned lodge hidden among the pines. The place looked like it had been left to die. Broken windows, collapsed porches, a leaking roof, and 40 years of dust covering everything inside. Most people would have walked away. Ethan moved in. What started as a desperate attempt to survive slowly became something else. He repaired walls, fixed doors, cleared rooms no one had entered for decades. For the first time in years, he felt like he was building something instead of running from everything. Then, one cold evening, while replacing damaged floorboards near an old stone fireplace, his hammer struck something unusual beneath the wall. Not wood, not stone, metal. Hidden behind decades of construction was a sealed door. A door nobody in town remembered. A door that hadn't been opened in more than 40 years. And when Ethan finally stepped through it, he uncovered a secret that changed everything people thought they knew about the mountain, the lodge, and the man who vanished there long ago. But before we go back to the beginning of Ethan's story, I'd love to know where you're listening from today. What city, state, or country are you watching from? And what time is it where you are right now? Let me know in the comments below. I always enjoy seeing where these stories travel around the world. And if you enjoy survival stories, forgotten places, hidden mysteries, and life-changing discoveries, take a second to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. It helps the channel tremendously and ensures you won't miss the next story. Now, let's go back to the day Ethan Cole lost the last place he could call home. The last place Ethan Cole slept before becoming homeless was a narrow bunk bed inside a crowded shelter on the edge of town. It wasn't much. The mattress sagged in the middle. The blanket smelled faintly of bleach. The room held 12 other teenagers, separated only by thin partitions that barely reached the ceiling. But it was warm. It was safe. And for nearly 2 years, it had been the closest thing Ethan had to a home. Then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, everything changed. "I'm sorry, Ethan," Mrs. Lawson said from behind her desk. "You know the rules." Ethan nodded, even though he hated hearing those words. The rules. He had heard them repeated for months. Once residents turned 16 and aged out of the program, beds were reassigned. Funding was limited. Space was limited. Exceptions were rare. "We've contacted a few organizations," Mrs. Lawson continued, "but there are waiting lists everywhere." Ethan stared at the floor. He wasn't angry at her. Mrs. Lawson had done more for him than most people. She had helped him find school supplies, helped him get a part-time job washing dishes, helped him survive. But none of that changed the reality sitting between them. By sunset, he would no longer have a bed. "How much money do you have saved?" she asked gently. Ethan already knew the answer. $147. He had counted it 3 times that morning. Not enough for rent, not enough for a hotel, barely enough to survive for a few weeks if he was careful. Mrs. Lawson opened a drawer and handed him a folded piece of paper. "A former resident told me about this place years ago." Ethan unfolded it. The paper contained a rough map leading toward a remote mountain region nearly 50 miles away. At the bottom, someone had written a single sentence. "Old lodge, abandoned for decades. Good shelter if you're desperate." Ethan looked up. "An abandoned lodge?" Mrs. Lawson shrugged. I don't know if it's still standing. That's encouraging. She smiled sadly. It's the only lead I've got. By late afternoon, Ethan carried everything he owned inside a worn backpack. 3 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, a sleeping bag, a flashlight, several books, a small toolkit. The contents of his entire life fit comfortably on one shoulder. As he stepped outside the shelter, cold rain greeted him immediately. Several staff members waved goodbye. A few younger kids stood near the entrance watching him leave. Ethan forced a smile. Then he started walking. The first night wasn't terrible. He slept beneath the covered entrance of an old office building. The second night was worse. Temperatures dropped. Wind howled through the streets. Sleep became nearly impossible by the third day. Exhaustion had settled deep into his bones. He spent most of his remaining money on cheap food and bus tickets heading toward the mountains. Eventually, the city disappeared behind him. Roads narrowed, forests thickened. Cell service vanished. Everything became quieter. On the 4th morning, Ethan began following the hand-drawn map. The trail climbed steadily through pine forests and rocky hillsides. Fallen leaves covered the ground. Clouds drifted between mountain peaks. Despite his situation, the scenery was beautiful. Around midday, he stopped beside a creek to refill his water bottle. The silence felt strange. After years of shelters, crowded streets, and constant noise, he wasn't used to hearing nothing. No traffic, no sirens, no voices. Just wind moving through trees. For the first time in months, he felt calm. The hike continued until late afternoon. Several times Ethan questioned whether the map was accurate. The trail grew fainter. Some sections disappeared entirely. Eventually, he reached a steep ridge overlooking a narrow valley. That's when he saw it. The lodge. Even from a distance, it looked enormous. 3 stories tall, built from stone and timber, nestled against the mountainside beneath towering pines. Time had not been kind. Several windows were broken. Portions of the roof had collapsed. One side of the porch leaned noticeably. Nature was slowly reclaiming the structure, yet it remained standing. Ethan stared for several moments. The building looked less like a lodge and more like a ghost from another era as he approached. Details emerged. Weathered signs, rusted railings, faded paint. The place had clearly been abandoned for years, maybe decades. Weeds pushed through cracks in the stone walkway. Small trees grew beside the foundation. The front doors stood slightly open. The wind moved them just enough to create a slow, creaking sound. Ethan climbed the porch steps carefully. One board immediately cracked beneath his weight. He stepped around it. Inside, the lobby stretched across a surprisingly large space. Dust covered everything. Furniture sat draped beneath stained sheets. Cobwebs filled corners. Sunlight streamed through broken windows, illuminating countless particles drifting through the air. The place smelled like old wood and forgotten memories. For a moment, Ethan simply stood there. The lodge felt abandoned, but not empty, almost as though it remembered being alive. He spent the next several hours exploring. Most rooms were unusable. Roof leaks had caused extensive damage. Entire hallways were blocked by fallen debris, yet several sections remained surprisingly intact. Near the rear of the building, Ethan discovered a small staff room with solid walls and a functional door. The ceiling looked stable. The windows could be repaired. Most importantly, it was dry. By sunset, he had chosen it as his temporary bedroom. The word temporary made him laugh. Temporary compared to what? He spread his sleeping bag across the floor and unpacked his supplies. The room wasn't comfortable. It wasn't pretty, but it was shelter. That alone felt like a victory. As darkness settled across the mountains, strange sounds echoed through the building. Wind moved through broken hallways. Floorboards creaked. Loose shutters rattled somewhere above. Several times Ethan sat upright, convinced someone else was inside. Each time he found only silence. Eventually, hunger drove him back downstairs. He ate a simple meal of crackers and canned soup while sitting beside the cold stone fireplace in the main lobby. The flames from his lantern flickered against the walls. Shadows stretched across the room. That's when he noticed the photograph. Hanging crookedly above the fireplace was an old black-and-white picture. Dust nearly obscured it. Curious. Ethan climbed onto a chair and wiped away years of grime. The image showed the lodge in its prime. Families stood on the porch, smiling. Cars filled the driveway. The building looked alive, prosperous, happy. In the corner of the photograph, someone had written a date. 1986. Ethan frowned. 40 years ago. What happened after that? Why abandon a place this large? Why leave everything behind? He climbed down from the chair and returned to his soup. The mystery wasn't his problem. Right now he had bigger concerns: food, warmth, survival. Yet later that night, as he lay awake listening to the mountain wind, his eyes drifted back toward the old photograph. Something about it bothered him. Not the image itself, the date. 40 years. A place that size didn't simply disappear without a reason. Somewhere inside the dark halls of the lodge, a story waited. Ethan didn't know it yet, but before winter ended, he would uncover a secret nobody had touched since the year that photograph was taken. Ethan woke before sunrise because of the cold. Not the kind of cold that made a person uncomfortable, the kind that forced its way through clothing, sleeping bags, and stubbornness. For several moments he remained curled inside his sleeping bag, staring at the dark ceiling. His breath formed small clouds in the air. The mountain lodge had protected him from wind and rain, but it wasn't warm, not even close. Eventually he sat up and immediately regretted it. The room felt like a refrigerator. "Good morning to me," he muttered. The first task of the day was firewood. Without it, the coming nights would become unbearable. After a quick breakfast of stale crackers, Ethan grabbed his backpack and headed outside. The mountains looked completely different in the early morning light. Mist drifted through the valley. Frost covered the grass. Sunlight painted the distant peaks gold. For a moment, he forgot about being homeless, forgot about the cold, forgot about everything. Then his stomach growled. Reality returned quickly. The forest surrounding the lodge provided more than enough wood, but gathering it proved harder than expected. Most fallen branches were damp, others were rotten. Ethan spent hours dragging usable logs back toward the building. By midday, sweat soaked through his jacket despite the freezing temperature. He had already made 6 trips. The growing pile beside the lodge looked impressive. Unfortunately, he knew it still wasn't enough. Winter in the mountains wouldn't care how hard he worked. It would only care whether he prepared properly. Later that afternoon, he explored the lower level of the lodge. Several hallways remained blocked by debris, but he slowly cleared paths through some areas. Most rooms contained little of value: broken furniture, moldy carpets, water damage. Then he discovered the old kitchen. The room was enormous. Industrial stoves lined one wall, Rusted shelves filled another. Pots and pans still hung from hooks above preparation tables. It looked as though everyone had simply walked away one day and never returned. Ethan opened cabinet after cabinet. Most contained nothing useful. Then he found a box of matches sealed inside a metal container. Dry matches, perfectly preserved. He smiled for the first time that day. Small victories mattered. That evening, he built his first fire inside the massive stone fireplace, dominating the lodge's main lobby. The flames crackled and danced. Warmth slowly spread through the room. Ethan dragged an old chair close to the hearth and sat watching the fire. For the first time since arriving, the lodge felt slightly less abandoned, slightly more alive. As darkness settled outside, he studied the old photograph hanging above the fireplace again. Families smiling on the porch, children playing near the entrance, cars parked in neat rows. The contrast between then and now fascinated him. Something significant had happened here. He could feel it. Yet every room seemed determined to keep its secrets. A loud creak echoed from the second floor. Ethan immediately sat upright. The sound was followed by another, then silence. His grip tightened on a nearby poker. The lodge was old. Old buildings made noises. He knew that. Yet knowing and believing were different things. Several tense moments passed. Nothing happened. Eventually, he relaxed. "It's just the building," he told himself. The lodge didn't answer. The next morning brought unexpected company. Ethan was hauling more firewood when he noticed movement near the driveway. An old pickup truck slowly approached through the trees. Instinctively, he froze. The truck stopped several yards away. A man climbed out. He appeared to be around 70 years old. Gray beard, heavy work jacket, weathered face. The kind of person who looked completely at home in the mountains. The stranger studied Ethan for a moment. Then he studied the lodge. Then he looked back at Ethan. "Well," the old man finally said, "didn't expect to see anyone living up here." Ethan wasn't sure how to respond. "Neither did I." The man laughed softly. "Fair answer." For several moments, they simply stood there. Then the stranger nodded toward the building. "You're staying here?" Ethan nodded. "For now." Interesting choice. Ethan had already heard that sentiment several times. People keep saying that. That's because most people avoid this place. The old man extended his hand. "Jack Mercer." Ethan shook it. "Ethan." Jack glanced toward the woodpile. "You've been busy." "Trying not to freeze." "Good strategy." The old man seemed surprisingly friendly, yet something about his expression suggested he was evaluating Ethan. Not judging, measuring, as though deciding whether the teenager belonged here. Eventually, Jack reached into the back of his truck and removed a small toolbox. "Roof leaks?" he asked. Ethan laughed. "Everywhere." "Thought so." The next 2 hours passed unexpectedly fast. Jack showed him how to patch several damaged sections temporarily before winter arrived. The repairs weren't perfect, but they were far better than anything Ethan could have managed alone. More importantly, Jack explained why certain parts of the building deteriorated faster than others. Every lesson felt practical, useful, real. By afternoon, they sat on the porch drinking coffee. Well, Jack drank coffee. Ethan drank hot chocolate from an old thermos. "How long has this place been abandoned?" Ethan asked. Jack stared toward the mountains. 40 years. Same number as the photograph. Ethan noticed immediately. What happened? The old man's expression changed slightly. Depends who you ask. Ethan groaned. Why does everybody answer questions like that? Jack laughed. Because sometimes the truth depends on who's telling the story. That wasn't helpful. Yet Ethan sensed pushing harder wouldn't work. Instead, he changed subjects. They discussed weather patterns, wildlife, mountain trails, local history. By the time Jack finally prepared to leave, the sun was already dropping behind the peaks. Before climbing into his truck, the old man paused. One piece of advice. Ethan looked up. What's that? Jack nodded toward the lodge. Don't rush into exploring every room. Ethan frowned. Why? Jack hesitated. Some parts of that building haven't been touched in decades. That sounds exactly like a reason to explore them. Jack smiled. Maybe. Then he climbed into the truck and drove away. The conversation lingered in Ethan's thoughts long after the taillights disappeared. That evening, he continued clearing debris from a hallway near the eastern wing. Progress was slow. Dust coated everything. Several doors remained swollen shut from years of moisture exposure. Most led to empty guest rooms. Then he discovered something strange. At the far end of the hallway sat a door unlike all the others. He almost missed it. The frame blended perfectly into the wall. Layers of faded wallpaper partially concealed its outline. There was no room number, no sign, no visible handle, just a narrow seam where a doorway should have been impossible. Ethan stepped closer. The hidden door looked deliberate, designed not to be noticed. Curious. He brushed away decades of dust. A small brass plate emerged near eye level. Most of the lettering had faded. Only 2 words remained readable. Private access. Ethan stared for several seconds. The lodge contained hundreds of ordinary doors, yet someone had gone through considerable effort to hide this one. The discovery sent a small thrill through him. He tried pushing it. Nothing. Pulling didn't work either. The door wouldn't move. Locked, or perhaps sealed as darkness settled outside the windows. Ethan finally stepped back. Whatever lay beyond the hidden doorway wasn't going anywhere. Still, as he walked back toward the lobby, he couldn't shake the feeling that the old lodge had just revealed the first piece of a much larger mystery. Ethan spent the next 3 days working harder than he ever had in his life. Every morning began the same way. He woke before sunrise, restarted the fire, checked the roof repairs Jack had helped him install, and then tackled another section of the lodge. The building seemed endless. Every room he cleaned revealed 2 more that needed attention. Every problem solved uncovered another one waiting underneath. Yet for the first time in years, the work felt meaningful. He wasn't washing dishes for minimum wage or completing tasks assigned by someone else. Every improvement belonged to him. Every repaired window made the lodge slightly more livable. Every cleared hallway felt like reclaiming territory from time itself. The hidden door at the end of the eastern hallway remained in the back of his mind. More than once he considered trying to force it open. Curiosity tugged at him constantly. But survival came first. Winter wasn't waiting for mysteries to be solved. Winter was coming whether he was ready or not. On the 4th morning, Ethan climbed onto the roof to patch another damaged section. The view from above surprised him. The lodge sat in a natural clearing surrounded by endless forest. Mountains stretched across the horizon in every direction. Looking down, he could see portions of the building that had been hidden from ground level. The lodge was larger than he originally thought. Much larger. Several wings extended behind the main structure. One section appeared completely isolated from the rest of the building. Strange. Why build it that way? As he worked, movement near the driveway caught his attention. A pickup truck slowly approached. This time it wasn't Jack. The vehicle was smaller and newer. A teenage girl stepped out carrying several cardboard boxes. Ethan climbed down from the roof cautiously. The stranger spotted him immediately. "You actually live here?" she asked. Ethan frowned. "Apparently." The girl laughed. "That's kind of amazing." She looked around at the lodge. "And slightly insane." Ethan had heard that opinion before. "Who are you?" "Chloe Bennett." She pointed toward the valley below. "My family's store is down near the main road." Ethan immediately recognized the name. He had stopped there once during his hike into the mountains. "You're the girl behind the counter." "And you're the guy who bought 3 cans of soup and asked if the mountain had bears." Ethan felt slightly embarrassed. That was a reasonable question. "It was actually," Chloe smiled. "The answer is yes. By the way." She opened one of the boxes. Inside were canned goods, blankets, batteries, and several basic supplies. Ethan stared. "What's all this?" "People heard somebody moved into the lodge." "Already?" Chloe shrugged. "Small town." Ethan looked through the supplies. Most were things he genuinely needed. "I can't pay for this." "Nobody asked you to." That answer caught him off guard. He wasn't used to people helping without expecting something in return. Chloe seemed to notice. "Relax. The town isn't adopting you." "Good. Although Mrs. Harper already calls you the mountain kid." Ethan groaned. Chloe laughed. The sound echoed through the empty lodge. For the next hour, she helped him organize supplies and clear debris from the main lobby. Unlike most people, Chloe seemed completely comfortable inside the abandoned building. She wandered through hallways, examining old photographs and furniture as though visiting a museum. Eventually, she stopped beside the large fireplace. "Did anybody tell you what happened here?" Ethan immediately thought of Jack. "Not really." Chloe nodded. "Figures. You know," her expression changed slightly. "Only the stories." Ethan sat on the nearby chair. "Let's hear them." Chloe looked toward the staircase. "Most people say the lodge closed after an accident." "What kind of accident?" "Depends who's telling the story." Ethan immediately laughed. "Everybody in this town says that." "Because nobody agrees." Chloe sat across from him. "Some people think the owner disappeared." "Disappeared?" "Others think there was a fire." "Was there?" "Not that anyone can prove." Ethan folded his arms. "Anything else?" Chloe hesitated. "There's another story." That usually meant the interesting one. "Go on." She lowered her voice slightly despite the fact that nobody else was present. "Some people believe parts of the lodge were sealed off deliberately." Ethan immediately thought about the hidden door. "Why?" Chloe shrugged. "Nobody knows." For a moment, he considered telling her about the brass plate and concealed entrance. Then he decided against it. Not yet. The mystery already felt personal somehow. Later that afternoon, after Chloe returned home, Ethan continued cleaning the second floor. Several guest rooms remained surprisingly intact. Most contained old furniture hidden beneath dust covers. In one room, he discovered a stack of magazines from the 1980s. In another, he found a collection of board games left behind by former guests. The lodge felt frozen in time, as though everyone had vanished overnight. Near sunset, he entered a room overlooking the valley. Unlike the others, This one contained personal belongings. Not many, just enough to stand out. A desk, several books, a faded jacket hanging near the door. Curious. Ethan opened the desk drawers. Most were empty. Then he found a guest registry. Hundreds of names filled the pages. Families, travelers, hikers, tourists. The entries stretched across years, then suddenly stopped. The final page contained only 3 names. Beneath them, someone had scribbled a handwritten note. Closed indefinitely. No explanation followed. Ethan frowned. The abrupt ending felt wrong. He flipped through the remaining pages. Blank. 40 years of silence. As he returned the book to the drawer, something slipped loose and fell onto the floor. A photograph. Ethan picked it up. The image showed several people standing in front of the lodge. One man stood at the center, tall, confident, smiling. On the back of the photograph, someone had written a name. Walter Grayson. Ethan recognized it immediately. The owner Chloe mentioned. The man supposedly connected to the lodge's disappearance. The photo should have been ordinary. Instead, something about it bothered him. After several moments, he realized why. Everyone else in the picture smiled naturally. Walter didn't. His expression looked forced, almost worried. And standing near the edge of the photograph, partially hidden behind the group, was another man whose face had been scratched out completely. The damage looked deliberate, not accidental. Someone wanted him erased. Ethan stared at the photograph for several seconds. Then he turned it over again. A second note had been written beneath Walter's name, smaller, nearly invisible. Trust no one below. A chill ran down his spine. Below what? Below the mountain? Below the lodge? Below the second floor? Questions flooded his mind. Suddenly, the hidden door didn't feel like an isolated mystery anymore. It felt connected. That evening, after darkness settled over the mountains, Ethan sat alone beside the fire studying the photograph. The flames cast moving shadows across the room. Outside, wind rattled loose shutters. Somewhere deep inside the lodge, an old floorboard creaked. Normally, he would have ignored it. Tonight, he didn't. Because for the first time, he wasn't convinced the lodge had simply been abandoned. It felt more like someone had tried very hard to make people stop asking questions. And if that was true, then whatever waited behind the hidden door might be far more important than he originally imagined. The photograph stayed on Ethan's mind for the rest of the week. Every time he passed the fireplace, he found himself pulling it from his pocket and studying it again. Walter Grayson, the worried smile, the scratched-out face, the strange warning written on the back. Trust no one below. The message made less sense the more he thought about it, yet he couldn't ignore it. Something had happened at the lodge 40 years ago. That much was obvious. The real question was whether anyone still cared. Meanwhile, survival continued demanding most of his attention. Winter arrived faster than expected. The first real snowstorm swept across the mountains during the second week of November. Ethan woke one morning to find the entire valley buried beneath white. Snow covered the driveway. Snow covered the roof. Snow covered every trail leading away from the lodge. The view was beautiful. It was also terrifying. Beautiful things could still kill you. For most of that day, he worked non-stop, clearing snow, reinforcing weak sections of the roof, bringing extra firewood inside. By sunset, his arms felt like they might fall off. Yet as he stood beside the fireplace, watching flames dance across the stone walls, he felt something unfamiliar. Pride. The lodge wasn't comfortable yet, but it was surviving the winter. And so was he. 2 days later, Jack arrived carrying supplies in the bed of his truck. The old ranger stepped into the lobby and immediately stopped. "Well, I'll be damned." Ethan looked up from a pile of tools. "What?" Jack slowly turned in a circle. "This place actually looks alive again." Ethan smiled despite himself. The compliment meant more than he wanted to admit. Jack spent most of the afternoon helping repair a broken water collection system behind the lodge. While they worked, Ethan decided to ask about Walter Grayson. The reaction was immediate. Jack stopped tightening a bolt and stared toward the mountains. "Where'd you hear that name?" Ethan hesitated. "Found an old photograph." The old man remained silent for several seconds. "Walter owned this place." "I know." "Good man." "What happened to him?" Jack tightened another bolt. "Nobody knows." Ethan immediately recognized the answer as incomplete. "You don't believe that?" Jack smiled faintly. "No." "Then what do you believe?" The old ranger finally looked at him. "I believe Walter left because he got scared." That answer caught Ethan off guard. Scared of what? Jack returned to his work. "That's the question, isn't it?" The conversation ended there. Not because Ethan wanted it to, because Jack clearly wasn't interested in continuing. Yet the statement lingered long after the truck disappeared down the mountain road. Walter Grayson got scared. The idea didn't fit the smiling lodge owner in the photograph. Then again, maybe that was exactly the point. The following weekend, Chloe visited again. This time, she brought several old newspaper clippings she had borrowed from the town library. "You wanted local history," she announced. Ethan immediately sat down beside the fire. Most articles focused on ordinary events, festivals, hiking competitions, tourism advertisements. Then one headline caught his attention. "Mountain Lodge to close after season." The article was short, almost suspiciously short. According to the report, declining visitor numbers forced the lodge to shut down. End of story. Except it clearly wasn't the end of the story. "That's it?" Ethan asked. Chloe frowned. "That's the weird part." "What?" She handed him another clipping. The date was only 2 weeks later. Local businessman reported missing. Ethan's pulse quickened. The article mentioned Walter Grayson by name. He had vanished shortly after announcing the lodge's closure. No evidence of foul play was found. Authorities believed he left voluntarily. Search efforts ended after several weeks. Ethan looked up. "That doesn't make sense." Chloe nodded. "Exactly. Why close the lodge and disappear 2 weeks later? Nobody knows." Ethan thought about Jack's comment. Walter got scared. Suddenly, the disappearance felt less random. They spent the next several hours sorting through additional articles. Most provided little useful information. Yet one detail appeared repeatedly. During the final year before closing, several portions of the lodge had been restricted from public access. Guests complained about locked hallways. Staff refused to answer questions. Construction crews were reportedly seen on the property. Then the reports abruptly stopped, almost as though someone wanted people to stop asking. That evening, after Chloe left, Ethan decided to revisit the eastern hallway. The hidden door remained exactly where he left it, invisible unless someone knew where to look. He brushed away another layer of dust and examined the frame more carefully. For the first time, he noticed scratches near the floor. Not recent scratches, old ones. Deep grooves in the wood, almost as though something heavy had been dragged through the doorway repeatedly. Ethan knelt closer. The marks disappeared beneath the wall itself. Strange. He followed them with his flashlight. Then he noticed something else. A faint draft. Cold air escaped from beneath the hidden door. His pulse quickened. There was space beyond it, not a sealed room, not a blocked corridor, an actual open area. The discovery transformed curiosity into obsession. The next morning, Ethan searched the entire lodge for blueprints. Most storage rooms contained nothing useful. Old furniture, broken equipment, empty filing cabinets. Then, in a cluttered office near the rear stairwell, he discovered a metal cabinet filled with water-damaged records. Most pages were unreadable. One wasn't. Folded near the bottom sat a faded blueprint of the lodge. Ethan carefully spread it across a table. The drawing revealed every major room, every hallway, every staircase. He immediately located the eastern wing. Then he frowned. According to the blueprint, the hidden door shouldn't exist. The wall behind it was supposed to be solid stone. Ethan examined the drawing again. Same result. No doorway, no room, no corridor. Nothing. Yet he had physically touched the door, which meant one of two things was true. Either the blueprint was wrong, or someone altered the building after it was created. Neither possibility felt reassuring. That night, a blizzard arrived. Wind hammered the lodge. Snow slammed against windows. The entire structure groaned beneath the storm. Ethan sat beside the fireplace, wrapped in blankets, listening to the weather rage outside. Around midnight, a loud bang echoed somewhere above him. He immediately grabbed his flashlight. Another bang followed. Then silence. His pulse quickened. The sound came from the second floor. Slowly, he climbed the staircase. The beam of his flashlight swept across empty hallways and abandoned guest rooms. Nothing moved. Nothing seemed out of place. Then he reached the eastern wing. The hidden door stood at the end of the corridor, and for the briefest moment, Ethan thought he saw something impossible. Light. Not bright, not obvious, just a faint sliver of yellow light visible beneath the bottom edge of the hidden door. He froze. The lodge had no electricity, no power, no reason for light to exist beyond that wall. Yet the glow remained there for several seconds before slowly fading into darkness. Ethan stood motionless in the hallway. The storm howled outside. The old building creaked around him. Somewhere deep inside the lodge, a secret waited behind a door that officially didn't exist. And for the first time since arriving on the mountain, Ethan began wondering if the mystery wasn't entirely buried in the past. Ethan didn't sleep for the rest of the night. He remained in the lobby beside the fireplace, replaying the moment again and again in his mind. The faint glow beneath the hidden door had been real. He was certain of it. The problem was that certainty didn't explain anything. The lodge had no electricity. The nearest power lines were miles away. Every wire inside the building had been disconnected decades earlier. There should not have been light behind that wall. Yet he had seen it. Around dawn, the blizzard finally weakened. Snow continued falling, but the violent winds disappeared. Ethan climbed the stairs and returned to the eastern hallway. Daylight filtered through cracked windows. Dust covered the floor exactly as before. The hidden door stood silently at the end of the corridor. No light, no sounds, no evidence that anything unusual had happened. He examined the bottom edge carefully. The narrow gap beneath the door revealed only darkness. "Great," he muttered. "Now I sound crazy." Still, the experience pushed him toward a decision he had been avoiding for weeks. It was time to open the door. If a mystery existed, it wasn't going to solve itself. The next several days were spent preparing. Survival still came first. The storm had damaged part of the roof. Several windows needed reinforcing. Firewood supplies required replenishing. Ethan threw himself into work. But the hidden door remained a constant distraction. Every trip through the eastern wing ended with him staring at it for a few extra seconds. Every night he found himself wondering what waited beyond it. During one particularly cold afternoon, Jack stopped by with supplies and news. The old ranger entered the lodge carrying a box of tools and immediately noticed Ethan's distracted expression. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Ethan considered the statement. "Maybe." Jack raised an eyebrow. "That sounds promising." Ethan hesitated before finally describing the hidden door and the strange light. To his surprise, Jack didn't laugh. He didn't dismiss the story either. Instead, he became unusually quiet. "You saw light?" he asked. For a few seconds, the old ranger stared into the fire. "Interesting." Ethan immediately noticed the response. "You know something." "Maybe," Ethan groaned. "Everyone in this town says maybe." Jack chuckled. "Fair complaint." For several moments, the old man remained silent. Then he nodded toward the eastern hallway. "That section wasn't part of the original lodge." Ethan sat upright. "What?" "At least, not entirely." Jack folded his arms. "Some renovations happened during the final years." "What kind of renovations?" "Nobody really knew." Ethan stared at him. "That's not suspicious at all." "Exactly." Before leaving, Jack offered one final warning. "If you do manage to open that door." He paused. "Take somebody with you." The statement lingered long after the truck disappeared down the mountain road. Take somebody with you. Not, don't open it. Not, stay away. Take somebody with you. That sounded less like a warning and more like advice from someone who already suspected what might be waiting. 2 days later, Chloe arrived carrying groceries and several old books from the town library. Snow still covered most of the valley, making travel difficult. Ethan immediately appreciated the effort. "I brought history," she announced. "That's a weird sentence." "You're a weird person." "Fair enough." The books contained local records, tourism guides, and newspaper archives. Most information repeated what Ethan already knew. The lodge opened in the 1950s, became popular during the 1960s and 70s, then suddenly closed in 1986. Yet one detail stood out. A brief article mentioned an expansion project during the final years of operation. Additional storage areas, utility corridors, private facilities. No blueprints accompanied the report. No photographs survived. It was almost as though somebody intentionally avoided documenting the changes. Chloe noticed the same thing. "Why spend money expanding a lodge you're about to close?" Ethan nodded. The timeline made no sense. They spent the rest of the afternoon searching the building for clues. Most discoveries proved disappointing. Empty storage rooms, broken furniture, old maintenance closets. Then, while examining the eastern hallway again, Chloe noticed something Ethan had missed. "What's this?" she asked. Near the hidden doorway sat a section of wall with slightly different paint, barely noticeable. Ethan walked closer. She was right. The texture didn't match the surrounding surface. Curious. He tapped it lightly. Hollow. His pulse quickened immediately. Several minutes later, they carefully removed part of the damaged paneling. Behind it sat a narrow metal box embedded into the wall. Both teenagers stared. "No way," Chloe whispered. Ethan carefully opened the box. Inside rested a single key. Old, heavy, made of brass. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then Chloe smiled. "Well, that's probably not a coincidence." The key looked ancient. Years of dust coated its surface, yet surprisingly little rust appeared, almost as though someone expected it to be used eventually. Ethan immediately thought about the hidden door. The key felt right. Too right. Evening arrived before they finally gathered enough courage to test it. Snow drifted outside the windows. Firelight flickered across the hallway walls. Ethan held the lantern while Chloe stood beside him. Neither seemed eager to be the first person through the doorway. "Ready?" Chloe asked. "Not even slightly." "Good." Ethan inserted the key. It fit perfectly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the mechanism turned with a loud metallic click. Both teenagers froze. The sound echoed through the hallway. 40 years of silence ended in a single moment. Slowly, Ethan pushed against the door. At first, it resisted. Then something shifted. Dust fell from the frame. Rusted hinges groaned. Inch by inch, the hidden entrance opened. Cold air rushed outward, air that smelled different from the rest of the lodge. Older somehow, untouched. Ethan lifted the lantern higher. Beyond the doorway stretched a narrow corridor descending into darkness. Stone walls lined both sides. Electrical wiring ran along the ceiling. The passage looked deliberate, professional, secret. Chloe stared into the darkness. "That definitely wasn't on the blueprint." Ethan nodded slowly. Neither moved. The corridor seemed to swallow the lantern light after only a few yards. Whatever lay beyond remained hidden, waiting. Then Ethan noticed something near the entrance. A small metal sign attached to the wall. Most of the lettering had faded, but one line remained readable. "Authorized personnel only." Below it, written in fading black marker, someone had added a final message decades ago. 4 words. "Do not go further." Ethan felt a chill crawl down his spine. Because unlike the official sign, this warning didn't look professional. It looked personal. Like somebody had written it in a hurry. Like somebody was afraid. And suddenly the mystery wasn't just about a hidden door anymore. It was about why someone had desperately wanted it to stay closed. For several long seconds, neither Ethan nor Chloe moved. The hidden corridor stretched into darkness beyond the open doorway, silent and undisturbed. Dust drifted through the lantern light. Cold air flowed steadily from somewhere deeper inside. The sensation reminded Ethan of opening a tomb. Not because it felt dangerous, because it felt forgotten. 40 years was a long time, long enough for memories to fade, long enough for secrets to become legends, long enough for entire sections of a building to vanish from public records. "Well," Chloe finally said, "this is either incredibly exciting or incredibly stupid." Ethan nodded. Probably both. He lifted the lantern higher and stepped through the doorway. The corridor descended gradually beneath the lodge. Concrete and stone walls lined the passage. Electrical conduits ran along the ceiling. Several old light fixtures hung overhead, though none had worked in decades. Everything looked professionally built. Whatever this place was, it hadn't been some hidden storage closet added by a handyman. Someone had invested serious money constructing it. Their footsteps echoed softly as they moved forward. Dust coated the floor, but not as heavily as Ethan expected. Strange. A place abandoned for 40 years should have been buried beneath layers of debris. Instead, the corridor looked merely old, not ruined. "Do you see that?" Chloe whispered. She pointed toward the floor. Ethan knelt. Several sets of footprints crossed the dust. Very old footprints. Their outlines were faint, but still visible. Some headed deeper into the corridor. Others returned toward the entrance. His pulse quickened. People had used this passage before it was sealed. A lot of people. After about 50 yards, the corridor ended at a steel door. Unlike the hidden entrance above, this one stood partially open. Rust covered its surface. A faded sign remained attached to the center. Maintenance access. Ethan exchanged a glance with Chloe. Maintenance for what? Good question. He pushed the door wider. The room beyond took their breath away. It wasn't a room. It was an entire underground level. Rows of shelves stretched into the darkness. Filing cabinets lined one wall. Wooden crates occupied another. Several work tables sat near the center of the space. The area resembled a cross between a storage facility and a research station. "What is this place?" Chloe asked quietly. Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't. The discovery made no sense. The lodge above looked abandoned and forgotten, yet beneath it sat a hidden complex large enough to support dozens of people. They explored cautiously. Most shelves stood empty. Several cabinets had been cleared completely. It looked as though someone had removed a significant amount of material before sealing the entrance. Yet not everything had disappeared. Ethan found stacks of maintenance records, supply inventories, equipment manuals. None seemed particularly interesting. Then Chloe called his name. "You need to see this." She stood beside a table near the rear wall. A leather-bound journal rested on its surface. Dust covered the cover, but the name embossed across the front remained visible. Walter Grayson. Ethan immediately felt a chill. The missing lodge owner. The man from the photograph. The man who supposedly vanished 40 years ago. Carefully, he opened the journal. The first page contained a handwritten message. "If you are reading this, then someone finally opened the door." Ethan looked up. Chloe looked equally stunned. The words felt personal, direct, as though Walter had been speaking across 4 decades. Ethan continued reading. The earliest entries described ordinary lodge operations, guest complaints, maintenance issues, staffing problems, nothing unusual. Then the tone began changing. Walter started mentioning unexplained construction projects beneath the lodge, meetings with unfamiliar investors, equipment deliveries arriving late at night. One entry stood out immediately. The men from the company returned today. They still refuse to explain what they're building beneath the mountain. Ethan sat upright. Beneath the mountain, not beneath the lodge. Beneath the mountain itself. He turned the page. Another entry followed several weeks later. "I entered the lower tunnels tonight. I wish I hadn't." Chloe slowly lowered the lantern. "Lower tunnels?" Ethan nodded. His pulse was accelerating. The journal continued. Walter described discovering sections of the underground complex hidden even from him. Areas not included on official plans. Areas constructed by a private corporation operating under extreme secrecy. Then came the first truly alarming entry. The drilling has reached deeper than expected. The engineers seem nervous. Nobody will tell me why. Ethan exchanged another glance with Chloe. This wasn't a story about a lodge anymore. Something else had been happening beneath the mountain. Something large enough to justify secrecy. Something serious enough that Walter felt compelled to document it. They spent hours reading. Outside, darkness settled across the mountains. Neither noticed. Walter's journal became increasingly urgent with each entry. Equipment failures, arguments between executives, restricted areas guarded around the clock. Then Ethan reached a page marked with heavy underlining. Today I learned what they're really searching for. His heart raced. He turned the page. Unfortunately, several sheets had been removed, torn out deliberately. Entire sections of the story were missing. "No way," Chloe muttered. Ethan carefully examined the damaged pages. Whoever removed them knew exactly what they wanted. The journal resumed several entries later. Walter's handwriting appeared shakier, more hurried. "People need to know the truth. If something happens to me, the records are hidden where the company will never think to look." Ethan immediately recognized the pattern. Another hidden clue, another secret layered beneath older secrets. Yet before he could continue, a sound echoed through the underground chamber. Both teenagers froze. A metallic clang, faint, distant, coming from somewhere beyond the far wall. Neither spoke. The sound came again, not loud, just enough to be unmistakable. Metal striking metal, somewhere deeper inside the mountain. Ethan slowly lowered the journal. Chloe stared toward the darkness beyond the storage area. "Tell me that's just the building settling." Ethan wanted to. He really did. The problem was that the noise didn't sound random. It sounded deliberate, like someone working or moving deep underground. 40 years after the hidden level was supposedly abandoned, then, as they listened in stunned silence, a single light appeared far down another corridor neither of them had noticed before. A faint yellow glow. Brief, flickering, then gone. The same color Ethan had seen beneath the hidden door during the blizzard. And suddenly, one terrifying possibility entered his mind. What if the mountain wasn't as abandoned as everyone believed? Neither Ethan nor Chloe moved for several seconds after the light disappeared. The underground chamber felt colder now, smaller somehow. The silence pressing against them no longer felt empty. It felt occupied. Ethan stared into the darkness beyond the storage room, half expecting the yellow glow to return. It didn't. The distant metallic sound never came again either. Yet the damage was done. The discovery had changed the atmosphere completely. Until now. Every mystery connected to the lodge belonged to the past. Walter Grayson, the hidden door, the sealed underground level, 40-year-old secrets. Now there was evidence that something or someone might still be down here. "We should leave," Chloe whispered. Ethan understood why. Every instinct told him she was right, but another instinct, the one responsible for opening the hidden door in the first place, refused to cooperate. He looked back at Walter's journal. 5 more minutes, Chloe groaned. That's exactly how people end up in horror movies. This isn't a horror movie. A loud creak echoed somewhere deep inside the mountain. Chloe folded her arms. "Your confidence is inspiring." Ethan ignored her and continued reading. Walter's later entries grew increasingly frantic. Entire paragraphs were underlined, Notes filled the margins. Several pages appeared written in the middle of the night. One entry immediately stood out. The company claims the project is geological research. That is a lie. Ethan read the sentence twice. Geological research. Whatever had happened beneath the mountain involved excavation, drilling, tunnels. The pieces were beginning to fit together. Another entry followed several days later. Today they sealed Tunnel B. 3 workers quit. None of them would explain why. Chloe leaned closer. Tunnel B. Ethan nodded. The journal mentioned multiple tunnel systems beneath the mountain. Most were identified only by letters. Tunnel A, Tunnel B, Tunnel C. Whatever operation existed here had been far larger than anyone realized. Then Ethan reached a page marked with heavy black ink. Walter's handwriting had become uneven, almost shaky. I entered the lower levels again. What they found should never have been disturbed. Ethan slowly lowered the journal. Okay. Chloe immediately noticed. What? This just got weird. She read the sentence herself. What do you think he meant? Ethan shook his head. No idea. That was becoming a recurring problem. Every answer produced 2 new questions. Still, one detail remained obvious. Walter wasn't frightened by financial corruption. He wasn't frightened by illegal construction. He was frightened by whatever the company discovered underground. Eventually, practicality won. They gathered the journal and returned to the lodge above. The hidden chamber would still be there tomorrow, hopefully. That night, neither slept particularly well. Ethan remained awake beside the fireplace long after midnight. Snow drifted outside the windows. The old building creaked softly around him. Several times he caught himself staring toward the eastern hallway. The hidden corridor seemed to pull at him. Somewhere beneath the mountain waited answers, and possibly trouble. The next morning he visited Jack. The old ranger was splitting firewood behind his cabin when Ethan arrived. One glance at the teenager's face told him something had happened. You opened it. Ethan nodded. Jack sighed heavily. Figured you would. Over the next hour, Ethan explained everything. The underground level, Walter's journal, the strange light, the noises. Jack listened without interruption. When Ethan finally mentioned the tunnels, the old ranger stopped swinging his axe. He actually wrote about them. Ethan immediately noticed the reaction. You've heard of them? Jack remained silent for several moments. Then he sat on a nearby stump. Most people think the stories are exaggerations. What stories? Back in the 1980s, trucks came up the mountain almost every night. Ethan sat down opposite him. Construction equipment. Jack nodded. Lots of it. What were they building? The old ranger stared toward the forest. Nobody knew. Nobody asked. Jack laughed. People asked. Nobody answered. Ethan thought about Walter's journal. Same pattern, same secrecy. The more he learned, the more deliberate everything seemed. Before leaving, Jack offered one additional piece of information. A few workers talked after the project ended. Ethan immediately leaned forward. What did they say? Most of it sounded crazy. Try me. Jack looked uncomfortable. They claimed something happened underground. Ethan waited. What kind of something? The old ranger shook his head. Depends who you ask. Ethan groaned. Jack smiled slightly. One said they discovered a massive cavern. Natural? Maybe. What did the others say? Jack's expression darkened. The others refused to talk at all. The answer bothered Ethan more than any ghost story could have. People invent strange stories all the time. Silence was different. Silence meant fear. Later that afternoon, Chloe returned carrying several photocopies from the town library archives. "You're going to like this." Ethan wasn't convinced. "That usually means trouble." "Correct." She spread the documents across a table. Most were permits related to the lodge's expansion project. Nothing unusual at first glance. Then she pointed toward a company name appearing repeatedly throughout the records. Summit Ridge Exploration Group. Ethan frowned. "Never heard of them." "Neither has anyone else." "Meaning?" Chloe handed him another page. The company appeared in official records for less than 2 years. Then it vanished completely. No current address. No successor organization. No public history. It was almost as though it had existed solely to build something beneath the mountain and then disappear. Ethan felt a chill. The mystery was growing larger again. That evening they returned to the underground chamber. This time they came prepared. Extra lanterns, additional batteries, more courage than common sense. Walter's journal mentioned multiple tunnels. If they wanted answers, they needed to find them. Near the rear of the storage area, they eventually discovered another door partially concealed behind shelving. The sign attached to it had fallen sideways decades ago. Ethan carefully brushed away dust. Tunnel Access B. Chloe stared at him. Ethan stared back. Neither spoke. Slowly, he pulled the door open. Beyond it stretched a narrow tunnel descending deeper into the mountain. The walls looked rougher here, less finished, more natural. Cold air flowed upward from the darkness below. The sensation felt different from the hidden corridor connecting to the lodge. This place wasn't constructed. It felt excavated, as though workers had carved their way into something that already existed. They advanced cautiously. The tunnel twisted downward for several hundred feet. Then it opened into a massive underground cavern. Both teenagers stopped walking. The space was enormous. Their lanterns illuminated only a fraction of it. Jagged rock formations rose from the floor. Shadows stretched across distant walls. Yet what caught Ethan's attention wasn't the cavern itself. It was the equipment. Rusted machinery remained scattered throughout the chamber. Drilling rigs, survey stations, electrical generators. Evidence of a large-scale operation abandoned in a hurry. Then Chloe pointed toward the far side of the cavern. "Ethan." He followed her gaze. On the wall opposite them, illuminated by lantern light, someone had painted a message in enormous red letters. The words stretched nearly 10 feet across the stone. "Do not dig deeper." Ethan felt his stomach tighten, because unlike Walter's journal, unlike the hidden door, unlike every clue they had found so far, this warning wasn't 40 years old. The paint looked fresh. For a long moment, neither Ethan nor Chloe spoke. The words painted across the cavern wall seemed almost unreal. "Do not dig deeper." The red letters stretched across the stone like a warning left by someone desperate to be heard. What unsettled Ethan most wasn't the message itself. It was how fresh it looked. 40-year-old paint didn't shine under lantern light. 40-year-old paint didn't look like it had dried recently. "Tell me that's impossible," Chloe whispered. Ethan couldn't, because she was right. The warning looked new. Someone had been here, not decades ago, recently, very recently. The cavern suddenly felt much less abandoned. Ethan slowly swept his lantern across the area. Everywhere he looked, evidence of the old excavation remained. Rusted generators, broken drilling equipment, crates collapsing from age. Yet beneath the dust, he began noticing smaller details. Footprints. Not many, just enough to matter. Fresh disturbances in the dirt. Marks where equipment had been moved. The realization sent a chill through him. Somebody wasn't just visiting the cavern. Somebody was using it. "We should go," Chloe said. For once, Ethan agreed immediately. They backed away from the warning and returned toward the lodge. Neither relaxed until the hidden door closed behind them. Even then, the feeling lingered. The mountain wasn't empty. The next morning, Ethan awoke to the sound of engines. At first, he thought he was dreaming. Then the noise came again, distant, low, mechanical. He climbed from his sleeping bag and hurried outside. Snow covered the valley beneath a pale gray sky. For several seconds, he saw nothing. Then movement caught his eye far below the lodge. Two dark vehicles crawled along an old service road nearly hidden beneath the trees. Ethan frowned. That road wasn't maintained. Most locals didn't even know it existed. Yet someone was using it. He watched until the vehicles disappeared into the forest. The direction immediately bothered him. They were heading toward the northern side of the mountain, the same area connected to the underground tunnels. By midday, Chloe arrived carrying supplies from town. Before Ethan could mention the vehicles, she surprised him with news of her own. "I found something." Ethan immediately sat forward. Chloe handed him a photocopied newspaper article. The headline dated back more than 40 years. "Mining project delayed after safety incident." Ethan read quickly. The article referenced a private exploration company operating near the mountain. Official details were vague, frustratingly vague. Yet one sentence stood out. Several workers reported unusual underground conditions before operations were suspended. "Unusual underground conditions?" Ethan asked. Chloe shrugged. "That's all it says. That could mean anything." "Exactly." The article continued describing equipment failures and temporary shutdowns. Then the story abruptly ended. No follow-up reports. No explanations. Nothing. Almost as though someone wanted public attention focused elsewhere. Ethan thought about Walter's journal. The missing pages, the hidden tunnels, the warning painted on the cavern wall. The pieces were beginning to align. Someone had been searching for something beneath the mountain, something important enough to hide, something dangerous enough to scare experienced workers. Later that afternoon, Ethan visited Jack again. This time he brought Walter's journal. The old ranger spent nearly an hour reading selected entries. His expression grew darker with each page. Finally, he closed the journal and stared into the distance. "I knew parts of this story," he said quietly. "Not all of it." Ethan leaned forward. "What aren't you telling me?" Jack sighed heavily. "Back then, people thought the company was looking for minerals." "Were they?" "That's what everyone assumed." Jack tapped the journal. Walter clearly believed otherwise. Ethan nodded. "He kept talking about something they found." The old ranger remained silent for several seconds. Then he said something unexpected. "My father worked on the project." Ethan blinked. "What?" "Only for a few weeks." Jack looked uncomfortable. "He never discussed it much afterward." "Why not?" Jack stared toward the mountains. "Because whatever happened down there frightened him." The answer landed heavily. Jack's father had been one of the workers, one of the people present during the excavation. "Did he ever say what they found?" Ethan asked. The old ranger shook his hand. "No." Then he hesitated. "But he said one thing." Ethan waited. "The mountain wasn't empty." Silence followed. Jack clearly understood how strange the statement sounded, yet he offered no explanation. Neither did Ethan, because deep down, he wasn't sure he wanted one. That evening, Ethan returned to the underground chamber alone. He told himself he was searching for answers. The truth was simpler. Curiosity had become stronger than caution. The storage level remained silent. Dust drifted through the lantern light. Everything appeared unchanged. Yet as he approached Tunnel B, something immediately felt different. The door stood slightly open. He was certain it had been closed when they left. Ethan's pulse quickened. Slowly, he stepped into the tunnel. The descent felt longer this time, more oppressive. Every sound echoed. Every shadow seemed larger. Eventually, he reached the cavern. The warning remained visible across the far wall. Do not dig deeper. But that wasn't what caught his attention. Near the center of the chamber sat a portable lantern, modern, battery-powered, still warm. Ethan froze. Someone had been here recently. Very recently. The realization struck like a punch to the chest. He wasn't alone in the mountain. Then he heard voices, faint, distant, coming from somewhere beyond the cavern. Ethan immediately extinguished his lantern and crouched behind a rusted drilling rig. The voices grew louder, not close enough to understand clearly, but close enough to confirm the worst possibility. People were moving through the lower tunnels, several of them. Ethan remained motionless, his heart hammered against his ribs. Footsteps echoed somewhere beyond the darkness. Then a flashlight beam briefly swept across a distant wall. Whoever these people were, they knew the tunnels existed. More importantly, they seemed familiar with them. This wasn't exploration. It was routine. Ethan waited until the voices faded before moving again. Retreating would have been the smart decision. Instead, he did exactly what Walter Grayson probably would have done 40 years earlier. He followed them. The passage beyond the cavern descended deeper than anything he had seen before. Narrow tunnels gave way to larger excavated corridors. Signs of recent activity appeared everywhere. Fresh footprints, new electrical cables, modern equipment. Someone had resumed operations beneath the mountain. Then Ethan reached a bend in the tunnel and stopped dead. Ahead, hidden within a larger chamber, stood an active drilling site. Powerful lights illuminated the area. Workers moved between machines. Generators hummed. Excavation equipment carved deeper into the rock face. Ethan stared in disbelief. After 40 years, somebody had returned. They were digging again. And hanging above the entrance to the excavation zone was a company logo printed on a temporary sign. Summit Ridge Exploration Group. The same company that supposedly disappeared decades ago. Except companies don't vanish and come back by accident, which meant one terrifying possibility remained. Whatever they had been searching for 40 years earlier, they still hadn't found it. Ethan lay awake most of the night after discovering the active drilling operation beneath the mountain. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the company logo hanging above the excavation site. Summit Ridge Exploration Group. The name should have belonged to history. According to every record Chloe found, the company vanished 40 years ago. Yet there it was, alive, operating, digging. The realization changed everything. This was no longer a mystery about the past. It was something happening right now. Snow tapped softly against the lodge windows as he sat beside the fireplace before dawn. The flames cast moving shadows across the lobby. Normally, the old building felt comforting. Tonight, it felt like a witness, as though the lodge had spent decades waiting for someone to uncover what it had been hiding. By sunrise, Ethan had already made a decision. He needed help, real help, not just Chloe, not just Jack. Someone with authority, someone who could investigate what was happening beneath the mountain. A few hours later, he found himself sitting inside Sheriff Mason Reed's office in town. The sheriff looked exactly like Ethan expected. Mid-50s, calm, practical, the kind of man who probably heard strange stories every week. Unfortunately, Ethan's stories sounded stranger than most. Hidden tunnels, secret excavations, a company operating beneath the mountain. Ethan expected skepticism. Instead, Sheriff Reed listened quietly. Very quietly. Too quietly. When Ethan finished, the sheriff leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. "The lodge?" he asked. Ethan nodded. "The old Grayson property." Something flickered across the sheriff's face. Recognition. "You know it?" Ethan asked. Reed looked toward the window. "Everybody around here knows it." Ethan immediately noticed the answer wasn't really an answer. The sheriff remained silent for several seconds before speaking again. "Show me what you found." That afternoon, Ethan returned to the lodge with the sheriff. Chloe joined them shortly afterward. Together, they laid Walter's journal, newspaper clippings, permits, and photographs across a large table in the lobby. Reed examined everything carefully. He spent nearly 20 minutes reading Walter's entries without saying a word. Then he stopped at one page and frowned. Interesting. Ethan immediately leaned forward. "What?" Reed tapped the journal. Walter had written a list of names connected to the original excavation project. Most meant nothing to Ethan. One didn't. Sheriff Mason Reed. Ethan stared. Chloe stared. The sheriff sighed heavily. "That's my father." Silence filled the room. Ethan blinked. "Your father worked on the project?" Reed nodded slowly. "He was a deputy back then." Suddenly, several pieces clicked into place. The sheriff hadn't reacted strongly because he already knew part of the story. "Did he ever tell you what happened?" Ethan asked. Reed looked uncomfortable. "Not much." "Why not?" The sheriff closed the journal. "Because every time he started talking about it, somebody told him to stop." That answer landed heavily, not because it was surprising, because it confirmed everything. Somebody had spent decades suppressing information about the mountain. Later that evening, the four of them, Ethan, Chloe, Jack, and Sheriff Reed, gathered around the fireplace. Walter's journal sat open on the table. Together, they began examining the missing pieces of the story. Slowly, a picture emerged. 40 years earlier, Summit Ridge Exploration Group arrived, claiming to conduct geological research. Construction began. Tunnels expanded. Then workers discovered something unexpected. Something important enough to trigger secrecy. Something important enough to shut down an entire lodge. "What exactly did they find?" Chloe asked. Nobody answered immediately. Then Jack pointed toward one of Walter's final entries. "Read that part again." Ethan did. The passage was short. "The company believes the discovery belongs to them. They're wrong. This mountain belongs to everyone." Reed leaned forward. "That doesn't sound like minerals," Ethan agreed. If the company had found gold or valuable ore, Walter probably would have written it directly. Instead, he described ownership, public ownership, shared ownership. The wording felt important, very important. Hours later, while studying old maps from Walter's archive, Chloe suddenly sat upright. "Wait!" Everyone looked at her. She pointed toward a survey map folded near the bottom of the pile. Several sections had been marked in red. At first glance, they appeared random. Then Ethan noticed something. The markings outlined a huge underground chamber, larger than anything they had explored. Much larger. "No way," Jack whispered. According to the map, the known tunnels represented only a fraction of the excavation. An entire section of the mountain remained unexplored. More importantly, the chamber sat directly beneath the active drilling site Ethan discovered. Summit Ridge wasn't digging randomly. They were trying to reach something. The next morning, Ethan returned underground with Sheriff Reed. This time they moved cautiously, deliberately. The sheriff wanted evidence before taking further action. The descent felt different now, more serious. Every tunnel carried new meaning. Every sign of activity mattered. Reaching the cavern, they immediately noticed fresh tracks. Equipment had moved since Ethan's last visit. Workers had been active overnight. Following the footprints deeper into the excavation zone, they eventually reached a partially cleared rock wall. Powerful floodlights illuminated the area. Drilling machinery sat idle. Nobody appeared present. Yet what lay beyond the rock face stunned them both. A natural cavern stretched into darkness, massive, ancient, beautiful. Crystal formations reflected light across the walls. Underground streams flowed through polished stone channels. The entire chamber looked untouched by time. Ethan stared in disbelief. Sheriff Reed remained silent. Then Ethan noticed something near the center of the cavern. Wooden crates. Old ones. Very old ones. Several had broken apart with age. Their contents spilled across the floor. Documents, maps, historical records, hundreds of them. Reed slowly walked forward. My God. Ethan followed. The documents appeared ancient. Some dated back more than a century. Others older still. Survey records, land grants, original settlement maps. The mountain wasn't hiding treasure. It was hiding history. The discovery suddenly explained everything. Walter's journal, the secrecy, the ownership disputes. Whoever controlled this archive could influence land claims across the entire region. Property rights, water rights, mining rights. Millions of dollars depended on those records. Summit Ridge hadn't been searching for minerals. They had been searching for proof. Proof buried beneath the mountain long before the lodge existed. Then Ethan spotted something else. A metal lockbox resting beside the crates. Unlike everything around it, the box looked familiar. Modern. Recently placed. Someone from Summit Ridge had already found the archive. His stomach tightened. They weren't searching anymore. They had succeeded. Sheriff Reed opened the lockbox carefully. Inside sat folders, contracts, and correspondence. The first page carried a familiar company logo. Summit Ridge Exploration Group. Beneath it was a document detailing plans to quietly transfer ownership of thousands of acres using information recovered from the archive. Ethan felt a chill. 40 years ago, Walter Grayson discovered the truth and tried to stop them. Now history was repeating itself. The company hadn't returned to finish an old project. They had returned to complete a theft. And for the first time, Ethan finally understood why Walter vanished. Because he was the only person standing between the mountain's history and the people trying to erase it. Ethan stood motionless inside the cavern, staring at the documents scattered across the stone floor. For months, he had believed the mystery beneath the mountain involved hidden treasure, dangerous minerals, or some forgotten disaster. The truth was stranger and far more valuable. The mountain contained history, real history, original land records, settlement maps, water rights agreements, and legal documents dating back generations. The kind of archive capable of changing ownership disputes across an entire region. Suddenly, Walter Grayson's actions made perfect sense. He hadn't been protecting a secret because it was mysterious. He had been protecting it because it mattered. Sheriff Reed slowly lowered one of the documents. "If this archive disappeared," he said quietly, "entire families could lose proof of ownership." Ethan nodded. Now he understood why Summit Ridge returned after 40 years. They weren't hunting for riches hidden beneath the mountain. They wanted control. Control over information. Control over land. Control over history itself. Then a sound echoed through the cavern. Engines. Both Ethan and the sheriff froze. Voices followed. Multiple voices, coming from the excavation tunnels. Reed immediately extinguished his flashlight. "They're here." Ethan's pulse accelerated. The workers had returned. This time, however, they weren't stumbling into a mystery. They were walking directly into evidence. The sheriff quickly photographed every document he could reach using his phone. Then he photographed the lockbox. Company records, contracts, and excavation plans. "If they destroy this place, the proof survives," he whispered. Minutes later, several men entered the outer cavern carrying equipment. Their conversation stopped instantly when they noticed movement. One man stepped forward, expensive jacket, clean boots, confident posture. He looked more like a businessman than a miner. "Well," the stranger said calmly, "looks like we've got visitors." Sheriff Reed stepped forward. "Looks like you've got a problem." The tension inside the cavern felt electric. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then the businessman smiled. "I assume you're interested in old paperwork?" Reed folded his arms. "I'm interested in why your company has been operating illegally beneath this mountain." The smile faded slightly. Ethan watched carefully. The man wasn't surprised. That told him everything. He knew exactly what they had discovered. "This archive belongs to Summit Ridge," the man replied. "No," Reed said firmly. "It doesn't." What followed wasn't dramatic. There were no fights, no chases through collapsing tunnels. Real life rarely worked that way. Instead, the businessman realized something important. The secret was out. Sheriff Reed had photographs. Ethan had Walter's journal. Chloe had records from the town archives. Too many pieces of evidence existed in too many places. 40 years earlier, Walter Grayson stood alone. This time was different. By evening, state investigators had been contacted. County officials arrived. Lawyers arrived. Reporters arrived shortly afterward. The story spread faster than anyone expected. A secret excavation hidden beneath a supposedly abandoned mountain lodge made headlines throughout the region. Over the following weeks, the full truth emerged. Summit Ridge Exploration Group never truly disappeared. The original company had dissolved decades earlier, but several investors quietly created successor organizations and continued searching for the underground archive. Walter Grayson discovered their plans and attempted to expose them. When pressure mounted, he secretly removed critical evidence, sealed portions of the underground complex, and disappeared from public view. Yet the biggest revelation arrived nearly a month later. Investigators located Walter Grayson, alive, 82 years old, living quietly in another state under a different name. The announcement stunned everyone, especially Ethan. When Walter finally agreed to speak publicly, his explanation was simple. "I wasn't hiding from the mountain," he said during an interview. "I was protecting it." The elderly former lodge owner explained how company representatives threatened lawsuits, financial ruin, and political pressure if he exposed their activities. Unable to win alone, he chose a different strategy. He hid the evidence, sealed the underground access points, left clues where future generations could find them. Then he disappeared. Walter never expected anyone to uncover the truth, certainly not a homeless teenager searching for shelter. Several months later, spring arrived. Snow melted from the mountains. Rivers swelled with fresh runoff. Green returned to the valley. And for the first time in decades, the old lodge felt alive again. Community volunteers arrived every weekend. Local businesses donated supplies. Contractors repaired structural damage. Families helped clean rooms untouched for years. What began as Ethan's desperate refuge slowly transformed into something extraordinary. A community project, a symbol, a second chance. Jack became a regular visitor. Chloe practically lived there on weekends. Even Sheriff Reed stopped by occasionally, usually pretending he had official business, when everyone knew he simply wanted to check on progress. One warm afternoon, nearly a year after Ethan first arrived, a new sign was installed above the entrance. Volunteers gathered to watch. Ethan stood near the front steps holding a drill. For several moments, he simply looked at the building. The same lodge that once seemed abandoned and forgotten now echoed with voices and laughter. Windows had been repaired, roof sections replaced, hallways cleaned. The transformation felt impossible, yet it was real. Chloe nudged him. "You going to hang it or just stare at it?" Ethan laughed. Together they secured the sign above the doorway. The words were simple. "Welcome home." Several people applauded. Ethan felt strangely emotional, not because of the sign itself, because of what it represented. A year earlier, he had arrived carrying everything he owned in a backpack. No family, no home, no future. The mountain gave him shelter when he needed it most. Then it gave him purpose. Later that evening, after everyone left, Ethan walked alone through the quiet lodge. Sunlight faded beyond the windows. The building settled into familiar silence. He eventually stopped beside the fireplace where his journey had begun. Above it hung the restored photograph of Walter Grayson and the lodge in its prime. This time, however, another photograph sat beside it. A new photograph. Volunteers standing on the front steps. Chloe smiling near the center, Jack pretending not to smile. Sheriff Reed looking mildly uncomfortable, and Ethan standing among them, part of something larger than himself. He stared at the image for a long moment. Then he looked toward the eastern hallway, beyond the hidden door. The mountain's secrets were finally safe. The archive would be preserved. The truth would be protected. Walter's mission was complete. As darkness settled outside, Ethan added another log to the fire and sat quietly in the warm glow. The old lodge no longer felt abandoned. The mountain no longer felt lonely. And for the first time in a very long time, neither did he. He had come to the mountain looking for shelter. Instead, he found a home, a family, and a story that had waited 40 years to be told. And as the fire crackled softly in the hearth, Ethan realized something important. Sometimes the door that changes your life isn't the one you were searching for. It's the one nobody else was brave enough to open.